December 2024 has been a crazy month for geopolitics. A lot of people are rightfully focused on Syria, where the government was overthrown in an offensive backed by the US, Israel, and Turkey, and Israel has bombed Syria hundreds of times and seized Syrian territory. Here we've done coverage of Syria, but today I'm going to talk about another crazy incident that happened the same week, which is that the president of South Korea, a close US ally, attempted to launch a military coup in which he tried to arrest his political opponents, declaring martial law, and he even tried to provoke a war with North Korea, attacking North Korea in order to justify suspending democracy and creating a military dictatorship in the South. This was a historic and insane event that did not get enough attention. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the main details and what you should know about this very important event. Now, South Korea is one of Washington's closest allies on earth, and it has been governed by the right-wing President Yoon Suk-yeol, who has been staunchly backed by the US, despite the fact that he's very right-wing and he's very close to Donald Trump and has been compared to Trump. He portrays himself as a kind of far-right populist, and yet Joe Biden, the Democrat in the US, has been very supportive of Yoon, and as Foreign Policy magazine put it, South Korea's aspiring autocrat became a DC darling. Foreign Policy magazine noted that Yoon has been a darling of the Washington foreign policy establishment, especially because he has taken a hard line against North Korea and China and has moved to repair relations with Japan. That's why US pundits were practically drooling for this authoritarian leader who tried to overthrow South Korean democracy. What this event shows is how the common narrative in the West that South Korea and Japan are loyal democratic allies against evil authoritarian China. That narrative is completely misleading. First of all, South Korea has only been a democracy since 1988. In fact, until 1987, for the majority of South Korea's history as a country, it was ruled by a series of military dictatorships that were backed by the United States. Similarly, in Japan, it is essentially a one-party state. Japan has been ruled by the right-wing Liberal Democratic Party with very few exceptions since 1955. This is known as the 1955 system. So Washington's closest allies in Asia are two regimes that are very undemocratic, and yet the US has tried to incorporate South Korea and Japan into NATO, into a formal military alliance, and wants to use these countries to isolate and weaken China, which is the main adversary of Washington these days. This is why the US government-funded propaganda outlet Voice of America complained that, quote, South Korea's leadership crisis jeopardizes US efforts to counter China, end quote. This is a ridiculous euphemism. It was not just a leadership crisis, it was an attempted coup by one of Washington's closest allies on earth. Since South Korea's leader Yoon Suk-yeol attempted the coup on the 3rd of December, more and more details have come out showing just how crazy this coup plot was. The leading South Korean newspaper, Hankyoreo, published an article revealing that the former defense minister under the president Yoon Suk-yeol had been trying to provoke a war with North Korea, trying to start a war with North Korea in order to justify imposing martial law and suspending democracy in the South. This is an article, again, published in the leading South Korean newspaper, and the article is titled, Ex-Defense Chief Suspected of Plotting War with North Korea to Justify Martial Law. I'm reading here from this report, quote, Former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun intended to justify the declaration of martial law or a state of united defense by instigating a military conflict with North Korea by ordering strikes on the sites from which the North was launching trash-filled balloons and flying unmanned drones to Pyongyang, end quote. Now, what this is referencing is that South Korea has been sending propaganda pamphlets and USB sticks and other materials across the DMZ into North Korea, and this obviously angered North Korea. So in response to the South initially starting this by sending over these propaganda pamphlets and such, the North responded by sending balloons full of garbage to the South. This is obviously not in any way an aggressive act. It's obviously very sarcastic. But in response to that, the South Korean regime was saying that we should use this as an excuse to provoke Pyongyang by attacking North Korea with drones. And in fact, in October, North Korea had reported that South Korea had sent drones across the DMZ as an act of provocation. At the time, many Western media outlets claimed that this was fake news spread by the North Korean regime. But now we know that this was actually true. This was part of a plot by South Korea's regime to justify a coup attempt. Other articles in the Korean media have provided even more information about this coup attempt. So on the 3rd of December, Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law. He claimed that opposition lawmakers were supposedly acting as agents of North Korea. He declared martial law. And so what happened is that members of North Korea's parliament or Congress, which is the National Assembly, that's their legislature, they went in the middle of the night, they went to the National Assembly to vote against the martial law. However, and meanwhile, the South Korean regime ordered the military to drag out the lawmakers. This was reported by the major newspaper, the Korea Herald. It explained how the National Assembly held a hearing of the National Defense Committee, which brought dozens of generals and military leaders to testify. And a special warfare commander said that the President Yoon ordered him to, quote, break open the door and drag the lawmakers out. They have not reached the quorum yet, end quote. So the goal was to prevent the elected members of the legislature from trying to stop the martial law by using the military to physically remove them. And because the military was blocking access to the National Assembly, Korean lawmakers were actually climbing over the wall to try to go in to vote against martial law. It was a crazy situation. Meanwhile, South Korea's US-backed president, one of Washington's closest allies on earth, made a list of politicians whom he wanted to arrest, including not only members of the Korean opposition, but even the leader of his own party. One of the main people whom he tried to arrest was the leader of the main opposition party, which is called the Democratic Party, and his name is Lee Jae-myung, and he was accused of supposedly being pro-China, which, according to the right wing in Korea, is a crazy, horrible crime. And of course, the US is trying to support these far-right Korean politicians because they are anti-China. And the deputy director of the National Intelligence Service in South Korea said that the US-backed Korean president tried to, quote, use this chance to arrest them and wipe them out, end quote. So he wanted to try to eliminate all of the opposition, and especially anyone in Korea who is seen as supposedly being pro-China. Now, as if the story weren't already crazy enough, the South Korea-focused news website, The Blue Roof, also cited testimony that was given in this hearing held by the National Assembly's Defense Committee, in which it revealed other potential plans during this coup attempt, which are just insane, absolutely crazy. It notes that one of the plans was to arrest leaders of the Democratic Party who are left-leaning, and the military dispatched the Special Forces Unit, whose main task is to assassinate North Korean leaders in case of war. They were given a false North Korean uniform, and the plan was to have these special forces assassinate the left-leaning leaders of the South Korean opposition, including Lee, the head of the Democratic Party. And if that failed, They were going to claim that they were rescuing, supposedly, these politicians from supposedly North Koreans, although they were in false North Korean uniforms. And then accidentally, their plan was to kill the opposition leader. I mean, this is as crazy as a coup plot could get. And I have to say that as I was doing research about this event, the more and more details I found, the crazier it became. I mean, the cherry on top of this madness is that after the coup attempt failed, the former defense minister, Kim Yong-hyun, he was detained. And while he was in detention, he tried to take his own life using his underwear. I swear to you, I'm not joking. He used his underwear to try to take his own life just before it was announced that he would be arrested and face charges for carrying out this coup attempt. But as crazy as this incident was, it actually wasn't a surprise for some people in South Korea. It certainly surprised a lot of us around the world who don't super closely follow everything that goes on in internal South Korean politics. But there actually were signs leading up to the coup attempt that it would happen. This was reported on by the Korea Herald. It noted that senior officers of the South Korean military were ordered to be on standby for a supposed North Korea-related situation in the days leading up to President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of martial law. Therefore, the coup attempt was plotted in advance. And this also helps us understand reports from back in September, 3 months before the coup attempt, in which there were rumors going around that Yoon Suk-yeol was plotting a coup attempt. This was reported at the time by the Korean media. And they said, why is Korea's Democratic Party talking about martial law? At the time, this was portrayed as a crazy conspiracy theory. They said, there's no evidence of this. Well, it's because they heard rumors because this had been plotted for months before it happened. So this has led people around the world to ask, why did this happen? Why did Yoon spend months planning a coup? Well, there are a few reasons.